The stack of cash sat there, untouched. 50,000 Korean won's notes, crisp and clean, left on the metal counter of a food truck window. The woman behind it didn't even glance down as she stirred her pot of jollof rice, steam rising into the cold Seoul night. The most powerful crime boss in the city stood outside in the rain, watching her ignore his money for the third time this week. And what he did next would change both their lives forever. Stay with me until the end because this story will leave you speechless. But first, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. This is Mafia Moonlight Tales. And now, let's get into it. It's 2 a.m. on a Friday night in Itaewon, Seoul's most dangerous district. The narrow alley behind the nightclub row is quiet now, the last drunken revelers having stumbled home an hour ago. Neon signs flicker in Korean and English, casting red and blue shadows across wet pavement. And in this alley sits a food truck that doesn't belong here, bright yellow with hand-painted letters that read, Amara's Fusion Kitchen. Inside that truck, behind the service window, stands Amara Okoye. At 29 years old, she's built something from nothing in a city that didn't want her. Her black head wrap is tied with military precision. Her red apron is spotless despite 12 hours of cooking. Her movements are efficient, practiced, the rhythm of someone who's learned that wasted motion means wasted money. She wipes down her station with the same focused intensity most people reserve for battle. Amara doesn't smile at customers. She doesn't make small talk. She serves food that makes grown men weep with nostalgia for places they've never been. And then she counts her cash and prepares for the next day. Every one she earns goes into a coffee tin under her bed. Every customer who tries to linger gets a polite but firm dismissal. She came to Seoul with nothing but a borrowed suitcase and a recipe book her grandmother pressed into her hands. And she survived 3 years in this city by following one simple rule: trust no one. But standing outside her window tonight is a man who isn't used to being ignored. Han Jun-suk didn't build Seoul's most feared organized crime syndicate by accepting rejection. At 38, he controls everything from the luxury hotels in Gangnam to the gambling dens in Hongdae. Politicians return his calls. Police captains know better than to look too closely at his businesses. And when he walks into a room, people either bow or they disappear. Tonight, he's dressed in a black suit that costs more than Amara's entire truck. His hair is perfectly styled despite the rain. A Patek Philippe watch catches the neon light as he stands there, holding another thick stack of bills. This is his 4th visit this week. Each time he's left increasingly larger tips. Each time she's placed his order on the counter without a word, without a smile, without even meeting his eyes. The first night, he'd left 20,000 Korean wons for a 8,000 Korean wons meal. She'd pushed the extra bills back across the counter without speaking. The second night, 50,000 Korean wons. She'd let them sit there until the rain soaked them, then thrown them in her trash bin after he left. The third night, 100,000 Korean wons. She'd actually stopped cooking long enough to look at him, not at his face but at the money in his hand, and then returned to her pot without a word. For a man like Han Jun-suk, this wasn't just rejection. This was something he'd never experienced before. Irrelevance. In his world, money was respect. Money was power. Money was the language that everyone spoke. But this African woman with the steady hands and the unreadable face seemed to exist in a reality where his currency meant nothing. It drove him mad. His lieutenants had noticed. They'd started whispering among themselves about the boss's strange obsession with a food truck chef. Some suggested handling it the traditional way. A visit from enforcers, a reminder of how things worked in Seoul. But Jun-suk had dismissed those suggestions with a look that ended the conversation. This wasn't about territory or business. This was personal. Tonight something is different. Amara can feel it even before she sees the cars. She's cleaning her griddle, preparing to close for the night, when she hears the engines. Not one car. 3. Black sedans that move with predatory precision, cutting off both ends of the alley with the practiced coordination of a military operation. Her hand tightens on her metal spatula. She doesn't stop cleaning, but her movements become slower, more deliberate. She's been in tight situations before. Lagos had taught her that survival meant staying calm when everyone else panicked. The center car's door opens. Han Jun-suk steps out, and this time there's no stack of bills in his hand. This time he's done playing games. He walks toward her truck with the confidence of a man who's never been told no and meant it. His expensive leather shoes splash through puddles. Rain begins to fall harder, but he doesn't seem to notice. His eyes are locked on the food truck window, where Amara stands framed in the warm yellow light, still wiping down her station as if 3 cars full of gangsters haven't just trapped her in an alley at 2 a.m. When he reaches the window, he doesn't speak immediately. He just stands there, studying her face with an intensity that would make most people flinch. But Amara meets his gaze for the first time since this started. Her dark eyes are steady, unafraid. The silence stretches between them like a blade. Then Han Jun-suk leans forward, placing both hands on the counter of her food truck. His voice, when he finally speaks, is quiet but carries the weight of absolute authority. The voice of a man who's ordered deaths with a whisper. For weeks, I've tried to buy your attention, your smile, your acknowledgement. He pauses, and something dangerous flickers in his eyes. But I realize now that I've been offering you the wrong thing. Amara says nothing. She simply places her spatula down on the counter, not as a surrender, but as a deliberate choice. Whatever is about to happen, she wants her hands free. Jun-suk's lips curve into something that isn't quite a smile. You don't want my money, so let me make a different request. He leans closer, until the warm steam from her cooking mingles with the cold rain on his face. Serve me your heart next. The words hang in the air between them. Not a request. A demand wrapped in poetry. A line crossed that can never be uncrossed. What Han Jun-suk doesn't know yet is that the woman standing before him has survived things that would break most men. That she's buried friends and family. That she's crossed continents and oceans to build something that belongs only to her. That the last time someone tried to own her, she left everything behind and started over with nothing. What Amara doesn't know yet is that the man trying to cage her is himself trapped, caught between the empire he's built and the emptiness it's left in his chest. That for all his power, he's searching for the one thing money can't buy. But they're both about to find out. Because in this rain-soaked alley in Seoul, with 3 cars of enforcers watching and a food truck window standing between them, 2 people who have survived by never bending are about to discover what happens when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force. And the city of Seoul will never be the same. 3 weeks earlier, Han Jun-suk had discovered Amara's food truck by accident. He'd been leaving a late-night meeting at Club Azure, one of the many establishments that paid him protection money, when the smell hit him. Spices he didn't recognize, rich and complex, cutting through the usual stench of Itaewon's back alleys. Soju, vomit, and desperation. His driver had already opened the car door, but Jun-suk found himself walking toward that yellow truck instead, drawn by something he couldn't name. The woman behind the window had looked up briefly when he approached, her face illuminated by the fluorescent lights of her tiny kitchen. She was beautiful, he supposed, but that wasn't what stopped him. It was the way she looked at him, or rather didn't look at him. Her gaze passed over his tailored suit, his bodyguards lingering nearby, his presence itself, and registered absolutely nothing. No fear. No recognition. No interest. Jollof rice with grilled chicken, she'd said in accented Korean, as if he were any random drunk stumbling out of the clubs. 8,000 Korean wons. He'd paid with a 50,000 Korean wons note, expecting the usual fawning gratitude, the nervous smiles people gave him when they realized who he was. Instead, she'd made change without comment and slid his order across the counter in a plain paper container. The food had been extraordinary, but that wasn't why he came back. He came back because for the first time in 15 years, someone had looked at Han Jun-suk and seen nothing worth noticing. And it had shaken something loose in his chest that he thought he'd buried long ago. By the second week, his visits had become routine. Tuesdays and Fridays, always after midnight, always alone. His men learned to wait in the cars while their boss stood in the rain, eating jollof rice from a paper container like a common salary worker. They didn't understand it. Neither did Jun-suk, if he was honest. He learned her patterns. She opened at 6 p.m. and closed at 2 a.m., 7 days a week. She spoke to customers in broken Korean, efficient and cold. She never took breaks, never checked her phone, never seemed to exist outside the four metal walls of that truck. When the clubs emptied and drunk businessmen stumbled to her window with slurred propositions, she served them without expression and took their money without comment. Once, he'd watched a suited executive grab her wrist across the counter, demanding she smile for him. She'd looked down at the man's hand, then back at his face, and said something in English too quiet for Jun-suk to hear. Whatever it was made the drunk release her immediately and walk away, pale despite his intoxication. Jun-suk had wanted to follow that man, to teach him what happened to people who touched things that didn't belong to them. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She didn't belong to anyone. And Han Jun-suk was beginning to realize that was exactly why he couldn't stop coming back. The rain had started at midnight, turning Seoul's neon reflections into watercolor streaks across black pavement. Amara watched the last customer of the night disappear around the corner, a college student who'd thanked her 3 times for staying open late. She'd nodded once, already turning to clean her griddle. 2 a.m. Time to pack up and navigate her truck through the maze of alleys back to the commercial parking lot she rented in Yongsan. The route was always the same, left out of the alley right at the main road, straight for 15 minutes. She had it timed to the minute. She was wiping down the counter when she heard them. Engines. Multiple. Moving with synchronized precision that had nothing to do with traffic patterns and everything to do with intention. Amara's hand stilled on the rag. She'd heard engines like that before in Lagos, right before her father's shop had been surrounded by men who said he owed money to people who didn't forget debts. She'd been 14 then, hiding in the back room while her father negotiated for their lives with nothing but words and dignity. She set down the rag and moved to the driver's seat of her truck, key already in hand. The first sedan appeared at the mouth of the alley ahead of her, sliding into position like a chess piece capturing a square. Black paint. Tinted windows. Expensive enough that it didn't belong in this part of Itaewon at 2 a.m. unless it was hunting something. Amara's jaw tightened. She shifted into reverse. The second car materialized behind her, blocking the only exit, its headlights flooding her truck's interior with harsh white light. She was boxed in. Perfectly, professionally trapped in an alley barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass. The third car pulled up alongside the first, and that's when Han Jun-suk stepped out into the rain. He didn't hurry, didn't run. He walked toward her truck with the inevitability of a tide, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who moved like soldiers. Water ran down his face, plastered his hair to his forehead, soaked his probably priceless suit. He didn't seem to notice or care. Amara watched him approach through the windshield, her expression unchanged. Her mind was already calculating. 3 cars meant at least 9 men, possibly more. She had a kitchen knife under her seat and pepper spray in her apron pocket. Neither would matter against these numbers. Fighting wasn't an option. But neither was cowering. She killed the engine, stepped out of the driver's seat and moved back to the service window, where she had light and leverage and the metal frame between them. When Jun-suk reached her, rain hammering the truck's metal roof like drumfire, she was standing exactly where she'd been all night, behind her counter, spine straight, eyes level, waiting for him to say what he'd come 3 cars deep to say. The alley had become a cage, and Han Jun-suk had finally stopped pretending this was about food. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the service window. Rain pounded the truck's roof. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. The men in dark suits stood motionless by the cars, waiting for orders that hadn't come yet. Jun-suk spoke first, his voice carrying despite the storm. "Do you know who I am?" "No." Amara's answer was immediate, honest. "Should I?" Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or irritation. He was used to his reputation preceding him, to the weight his name carried in every corner of this city. But this woman looked at him like he was just another customer who'd overstayed his welcome. "I own half of Itaewon," he said quietly. "The clubs you hear at night. The restaurants that stay open. The apartments people sleep in. When I speak, people listen. When I ask for something, I receive it." Amara nodded slowly, as if considering this information. Then she reached for her spatula and resumed wiping it down. "Your jollof rice is 8,000 Korean wons. You want extra chicken, that's 3,000 Korean wons more. I don't give discounts." Jun-suk's hands tightened on the edge of her counter. "You think this is about food?" "I think," Amara said, meeting his eyes with an unsettling calm, "that you've brought 3 cars full of men to trap a woman who's trying to close her business. I think you're used to people being afraid of you. And I think you're about to be disappointed." The words hung between them like a challenge. One of the bodyguards shifted, hand moving toward his jacket, but Jun-suk raised a finger without looking back. The man froze. "Everyone wants something," Jun-suk said, leaning closer. "Money, protection, power, status. I've built an empire understanding what people want and giving it to them, for a price. But you..." He shook his head slowly. "You're different. You don't want anything I have. And that makes you either very stupid or very dangerous. Or very tired," Amara replied. "It's 2 a.m. I've been cooking for 8 hours. And I have to be back here in 16 hours to do it again. So say what you came to say." Jun-suk studied her face. The steady eyes, the set of her jaw, the way she held her ground despite being trapped and outnumbered. He'd broken harder men with less effort. He'd made politicians weep and rivals disappear. But this woman with her food truck and her silence had done something no one else had managed in 15 years. She'd made him feel powerless. "For weeks, I've tried to buy your attention," he said softly. "Your smile. Your acknowledgement. But I realize now that I've been offering you the wrong thing." He leaned forward until the rain on his face mingled with the steam from her kitchen. "Serve me your heart next." Amara set down her spatula with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "My heart is not on the menu." Jun-suk stared at her, waiting for the fear to come. It always came eventually. The tremor in the voice, the downcast eyes, the nervous swallow. But Amara just looked back at him with something that might have been pity. "You think you're the first powerful man who's tried to own me?" she asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. Before he could respond, she continued, her accent thickening as memory pulled her somewhere else. "When I was 16, there was a man in Lagos named Chief Okonkwo. He owned the market where my mother sold fabric. Big man. Connected to politicians, police, everyone who mattered." She picked up a clean towel, folding it with mechanical precision. "He decided he wanted me. Told my mother it would be an honor. That he'd take care of our family. That girls like me didn't get better offers." Rain drummed harder on the truck's roof. Jun-suk found himself listening despite himself. "My mother said no. So Chief Okonkwo raised the rent on her stall. Then he had the police raid our home, looking for stolen goods that didn't exist. Then he sent boys to break my father's hands so he couldn't work as a carpenter anymore." Amara's voice remained steady, factual. "All because I wouldn't smile when he looked at me." She finally met Jun-suk's eyes again. "We lost everything. A stall. A home. My father's livelihood. We lived in a single room with 6 other families, sleeping in shifts because there wasn't space for everyone to lie down at once. I was 17. What happened to Chief Okonkwo?" Jun-suk asked, though he wasn't sure why he cared. "He's still there, I imagine. Still powerful. Still taking what he wants." Amara shrugged. "But I'm not. I saved money working 3 jobs. Cleaning houses before dawn, selling water in traffic during the day, cooking in a street stall at night. Took me 4 years to save enough to leave Nigeria. Another year working in Dubai to afford the flight to Seoul. She gestured around her small truck. This. I built this with money I earned cleaning toilets in Gangnam hotels. The men who hired me paid less than minimum wage because they knew I couldn't complain. The landlord who rented me my first apartment charged triple because I was foreign. The supplier who sells me chicken tried to assault me in his warehouse, then acted surprised when I broke his nose with a frozen chicken leg. For the first time since he'd known her, Amara smiled. It was not a warm expression. So no, Mr. Han. You and your 3 cars don't scare me. You're just another powerful man who thinks the world exists to give him what he wants. I've met that man before. In Lagos, in Dubai, in Seoul. Same face, different language. She leaned forward across the counter, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. And I've never given him what he wanted. Why would I start now? The bottle came through the darkness without warning. It shattered against the side of Amara's truck with a crack that cut through the rain, spraying glass across the wet pavement. Amara jerked back instinctively. Jun-suk spun toward the sound, his body coiling into something predatory. 4 men emerged from the shadows at the far end of the alley, walking with the swagger of people who'd mistaken an opportunity for an advantage. They wore mismatched leather jackets and had tattoos crawling up their necks, the uniform of the Buckshin Boys, a small-time gang that operated in the neighborhoods Jun-suk's organization had deemed too poor to bother with. The one in front, a kid who couldn't have been older than 23, grinned as he approached. Han Jun-suk. Heard you were slumming it in our territory. His Korean was rough, accented with Busan dialect. Didn't realize you needed 3 cars to shake down a food truck. Getting soft in your old age. Jun-suk's men moved immediately, hands disappearing into jackets. But Jun-suk raised his hand again, stopping them. His eyes never left the approaching gang members. This doesn't concern you, he said quietly. Walk away. The young leader laughed, pulling something from his jacket, a steel pipe that caught the neon light. See, that's where you're wrong. Foreign bitch has been operating in our area for months without paying respect. We were about to collect when you showed up with your parade. He spat on the ground. But maybe we can work together. You want her attention, we want our cut. Everybody wins. He moved toward the truck. Amara's hand slipped under the counter, finding the knife she kept there. I said. Jun-suk's voice dropped to something glacial. Walk away. But the kid was young and stupid and high on whatever courage comes from carrying weapons you've never really had to use. He raised the pipe. What are you gonna do? You're outnumbered. And everyone knows the great Han Jun-suk doesn't get his hands dirty anymore. He never finished the sentence. Jun-suk moved like violence made fluid. One moment he was standing at the food truck window. The next, he had crossed the distance between them, caught the pipe mid-swing, and used the kid's own momentum to slam him face-first into the truck's metal siding. The sound was like a gong struck in a cathedral. The other 3 gang members froze, suddenly understanding they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. Jun-suk held the kid against the truck with one hand, the stolen pipe in the other. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 15 years building an empire on broken bones and calculated terror. You want to know who I am? He pressed harder. The kid whimpered. I'm the man who burned the Samyong faction to ash for disrespecting my territory. I'm the man who put Choi Min-jun's crew in the ground for touching what wasn't theirs. He leaned closer. His words meant for the kid but his eyes on Amara. And I'm the man who decides what happens in this alley tonight. Jun-suk let the kid drop. The young gangster crumpled to the wet pavement, bleeding from his nose, wheezing. His friends dragged him away without a word, disappearing into the shadows like roaches when the lights come on. The alley fell silent again except for the rain. Jun-suk stood there, breathing hard, the pipe still in his hand. Slowly he let it fall. It clattered against the pavement with a hollow ring. When he turned back to the food truck, Amara was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did. He wiped rain from his face. They'll be back otherwise. Emboldened. Not for me. Amara tilted her head slightly. For yourself. To prove you still can. The observation cut deeper than the kid's pipe ever could have. Jun-suk found himself looking away first, something that never happened. When he looked back, Amara had moved to her stove. Sit, she said, gesturing to the small folding stool someone had left beside the truck. What? Sit down. You're soaking wet and you just beat a man half your age. Sit before you fall down. It was so absurd, being ordered around by the woman he'd just trapped in an alley, that Jun-suk almost laughed. Instead he sat. His men exchanged glances by the cars but said nothing. Amara worked in silence, her movements efficient. Rice into a bowl. Stew ladled over it. Grilled chicken, seasoned and perfect. She slid it across the counter without ceremony. Eat. Jun-suk looked down at the bowl. In all his visits, he'd always eaten standing, always walked away to consume his food alone in his car, always maintained the distance. This time he picked up the plastic fork and took a bite while she watched. The food was the same as it had always been, perfectly spiced, rich with flavor, the kind of cooking that came from muscle memory and cultural inheritance. But something was different now. He wasn't eating to fill a void or prove a point. He was simply eating. My grandmother taught me to cook, Amara said quietly, returning to cleaning her station. She said food was the only honest thing in a dishonest world. You can't lie in the kitchen. Bad ingredients make bad food. Lazy preparation makes lazy taste. And cooking without heart. She shook her head. People can tell. They always know. Jun-suk took another bite, slower this time. She said the greatest gift you can give someone is to feed them with intention. Not to impress them. Not to control them. Just to nourish them because they're hungry and you have food. Amara paused. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Not my heart. Just to be fed without conditions. He set down the fork, the bowl still half full. When he looked up at her, something in his chest felt cracked open. I don't know what I wanted, he admitted. I just knew I couldn't stop coming back. Amara nodded slowly, as if he'd finally said something true. The attacks stopped after that night. Amara noticed it first in small ways. The drunk businessman who used to grab at her wrist now kept his hands to himself, his eyes darting nervously toward the black sedan that had started parking at the end of her alley. The street kids who used to knock over her trash bins disappeared entirely. Even the building inspector who'd been threatening to cite her for permit violations suddenly found her paperwork in perfect order. She said nothing about it. Neither did Jun-suk, who still came on Tuesdays and Fridays, still ordered the same meal, still paid exact change now instead of insulting tips. But one Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the confrontation, Amara arrived at her usual spot to find 2 men in suits standing beside her truck. Not threatening, just present. When a group of college students approached, drunk and rowdy, the men didn't move. They simply existed, and somehow that was enough to make the students redirect their chaos elsewhere. What is this? Amara asked when Jun-suk appeared that night. He looked at the guards, then back at her. Insurance. I didn't ask for insurance. No, he agreed. You didn't ask for anything. That's why I'm giving it. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need his protection, that she'd survived 3 years without it. But the truth was more complicated than pride. The truth was she'd been robbed twice last year. The truth was she kept a knife under her counter and pepper spray in her pocket and still jumped at unexpected sounds. The truth was survival wasn't the same as safety. They're not here to control you, Jun-suk said quietly, reading her hesitation. They won't interfere with your business. They won't speak to your customers. They're just making sure what happened with the Buckshin boys doesn't happen again. Over the following weeks, Amara began to understand the full scope of what he'd done. The landlord who'd been threatening to triple her parking lot rent suddenly offered her a long-term lease at a reasonable rate. The produce supplier who'd been selling her second-rate vegetables at premium prices was replaced by a vendor who brought her the best ingredients at fair market value. The local police, who used to hassle her about permits and parking, now nodded politely when they passed. Jun Suk's organization wasn't collecting from her. They were clearing the path. One Friday night, as she handed him his usual order, Amara finally asked the question that had been building. Why? He didn't pretend not to understand. Because you were right. I am just another powerful man who thinks the world exists to give him what he wants. He met her eyes. But maybe I can be something else too. And what's that? Someone who protects the things that don't belong to him, Jun Suk said. Someone who uses power for something other than taking. Amara studied his face for a long moment. Then she did something she'd never done before. She smiled at him. It was small, barely there. But it was real. 6 months after the night in the rain, Jun Suk arrived at the food truck with an envelope. Not cash this time. Documents. Amara was in the middle of the dinner rush, serving a line of customers that had become her new normal. Word had spread about the African woman's cooking, and now people came from across Seoul to wait in her alley. She'd started keeping a list of regulars, remembering their orders, their names. Small concessions to the community growing around her yellow truck. Jun Suk waited until the line cleared, standing apart from his usual spot by the window. When the last customer left with a steaming container, he approached and slid the envelope across the counter. What is this? Amara asked, not touching it. A lease agreement. For a property in Itaewon, near the main road. 1,200 square feet. Full commercial kitchen. Seating for 40. He paused. It's yours if you want it. Amara stared at the envelope like it might bite her. I can't afford. It's paid for. 5 years fully covered. After that, if the restaurant is successful, you buy it outright at fair market value. If it fails, he shrugged. Then it fails. No debt. No obligation. She pushed the envelope back toward him. I don't take charity. It's not charity. It's an investment. Jun Suk's voice was patient, measured. You've built something remarkable from a food truck. Imagine what you could do with actual space. A real kitchen. Room to breathe. An investment expects returns, Amara said flatly. What do you want from me? Nothing you're not willing to give. He met her eyes. I want a table. Just one. In the back where I can eat your food without crowds or noise. And I want to know that when rival organizations look at that restaurant, they see my protection and leave it alone. So I become another business under the Han Empire. No. Jun Suk shook his head. You become a partner. Your name on the deed. Your decisions about the menu, the staff, everything. I'm just the investor who eats there too often and makes sure nobody bothers you. Amara picked up the envelope, turning it over in her hands. Inside was more than a lease. It was everything she'd dreamed about since arriving in Seoul with borrowed luggage and her grandmother's recipes. A real restaurant. Her name on something permanent. Roots in a city that had only ever offered her temporary ground. Why now? She asked quietly. Jun Suk was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. Because 6 months ago, you told me your heart wasn't on the menu. And you were right. I had no right to demand it. He gestured to the envelope. But maybe I can earn the privilege of sitting at your table. As a guest. Not an owner. Amara looked down at the papers, then back at the man who'd once trapped her in an alley. One table, she said finally. In the back. The restaurant opened on a Tuesday in spring, when Seoul's cherry blossoms turned the streets into pink and white dreams. Amara had named it Grandmother's Table in English and Korean both, the words painted in gold across a deep green awning. The interior was simple but warm. Wooden tables, soft lighting, walls decorated with fabric prints from Lagos that reminded her of her mother's market stall. The kitchen was 3 times the size of her food truck, gleaming with new equipment she'd chosen herself. Opening night brought a line that wrapped around the block. Food critics, curious locals, her loyal food truck customers who'd followed her to this new chapter. Amara moved through the kitchen like a conductor, her staff responding to her quiet commands with practiced precision. She'd hired carefully. Other immigrants who understood what it meant to build something from nothing, who cooked with the same intentionality her grandmother had taught her. At table 12 in the back corner, away from the windows and the noise, Han Jun-suk sat alone. Not at the best table. Not where everyone could see him. Just a simple two-seat setup with a clear view of the kitchen window, where he could watch Amara work. He wore a dark suit as always, but something about him seemed different, quieter. Less like a man who commanded rooms and more like someone who'd finally found a place where command didn't matter. His bodyguards waited outside. Inside he was just another customer. When the dinner rush finally slowed, Amara emerged from the kitchen. She carried 2 plates, her signature jollof rice with grilled chicken, prepared exactly the way she'd made it that first night he'd stumbled to her truck. She set one in front of Jun-suk and took the seat across from him with the other. "You're sitting," he observed. "It's my restaurant," she replied. "I can sit where I want." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the ambient noise of satisfied customers and clinking dishes filling the space between them. Through the windows, Seoul's neon lights painted the evening in familiar colors. "Thank you," Amara said finally. "For this. For all of it." Jun-suk set down his fork. "You built this. I just removed obstacles." "No." She shook her head. "You did more than that. You learned when to stop taking. That's harder." He considered this, then allowed himself a small smile. "You're a good teacher. And you're a decent student. When you actually listen." Outside, the cherry blossoms drifted past the windows like snow. Inside, a restaurant hummed with the warmth of good food and hard-won peace. And at table 12, 2 people who'd met as adversaries shared a meal as something else entirely. Not quite friends. Not lovers. But 2 souls who'd recognized in each other the same stubborn refusal to break, and had chosen respect over conquest. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. This is Mafia Moonlight Tales, and I'll see you in the next one.